Hello, friend, and welcome back to episode 11 of my 31-day challenge, where I am answering your questions about creating a career or a business that you love. And in today's episode, we're stepping slightly into the more creative realm. I'm answering the question, what technical skills do you need to be a VR storytelling professional? So we're going to be diving into that. If you've got a question, please reach out and ask it to me. It's Alex Makes VR across all of the social medias. You can ask me a slightly longer question at alexmakesvr@gmail.com. And every single day I am putting out these episodes. And if you would like reminding when they go live, please sign up to the newsletter. It's alexmakesvr.com. In that newsletter, I also give a bit of a rundown about the things that I cover in that episode. So that could be useful. So let's dive into this question. Now, this question sounds like it should have like a really simple answer. What technical skills do you need to be a VR storytelling professional? Sounds like there should be just, a checklist almost. You need this, this, and this. But the truth is, the quite annoying truth is that this will change. The answer that I give in this podcast probably won't be the same in 2 years' time. Hello, future listeners. If you're listening to this in 2021 or 2022, it's probably a very different landscape. But as of right now, you, my friend, listening in 2020, the technical skills that you need to be a VR storytelling professional really depend on what kind of story or what kind of experience you're trying to give someone. I would argue that the number one thing, and it kind of is implied in the title, right? The storytelling professional. The number one thing you need to be able to do is tell a good story. That's the first technical skill you need to learn. And that doesn't necessarily have to be, you need to be a scriptwriter or you need to be, an expert in story structure. We as humans are natural storytellers. It's so ingrained in us. We've been doing it for millennia. So it's not necessarily that. It's more understanding what kind of stories make compelling VR experiences. And I say this not necessarily knowing the answer to what, what audiences want or what makes a compelling story piece in VR. I've tried several pieces and, some people love them, some people hate them. Well, I don't know whether they hate them. They would never say that to my face, I don't think. But, there's pieces that I've watched where I go, not sure that quite worked. Or some pieces where I go, holy crap. Yes, yes, yes. In fact, for those of you who follow me on Instagram, which if you don't, please do, because I post like a lot of my updates in just like industry and general kind of creative news on my Instagram stories. But I am a judge for the Broadcast Awards this year, and I'm judging the category of the best VR experience. And so I spent about maybe 4 hours in a headset yesterday. And one of the pieces, which obviously I can't disclose necessarily which piece it was, but to me, technically, like on a technical level, it wasn't mind-blowingly brilliant. Like it wasn't like stepping into a headset and having like a Pixar experience or a Ready Player One experience. Like technically, there was nothing intrinsically new about what this piece was doing, but the story, oh my God, the story, the heart in this piece, the start, middle, and end, like the journey that it took me on, the kind of the way that like the music kind of like changed with the story and changed the tone. And it was it's a documentary piece. So for me, I always find that really interesting, because I think a lot of people, including myself, when I think storytelling, I generally think of like more narrative based stuff. I think about drama, but actually I think right now anyway, the current landscape for storytelling pieces, some of the best pieces are actually more documentary based or more reality. And I think that boils down to the fact that there was this great piece of advice that someone gave me once that said the way that you can tell if a VR experience, if a story is meant to be told in VR, is if it answers these two questions: are you there, and are you them? And I thought that was brilliant. I thought, be there or be them, and hope maybe even both. That idea that so much of telling a story in VR is about your environment. It's about the atmosphere of the location. The location itself becomes a character in your story. And that's why I think for a lot of experiences at the moment, documentaries work really well, because especially this particular piece, which is a piece that is talking about a very, very specific place, and you are interacting with the people of that place, but the place itself is a character in the story. And that itself is just really powerful. So I think story is like by nature the number one skill that you need to have if you're going to be a VR storytelling professional. So work on that. Work on I think a lot of it is just going and seeing what's out there. And the thing is, we're so early on with VR storytelling as a medium. And I won't give you the usual spiel of the fact that we are like the early kind of cinema pioneers, but we are. But we're so early on that there's not, it's not like there's like a mass amount of content to choose from. So therefore, I don't think you can make any like big, broad decisions about what does and doesn't work genre-wise in VR yet, because I don't think there's been enough experimentation. There's not been enough examples of all the different genres to decide, whether you need to specialize in any one particular thing. So that would be my number one thing: story. Tell a good story. Like, why are you telling this story in VR? And maybe even thinking about from that point of view, what is the difference that this experience is going to be like in VR versus if I told this in any other format? And I am not one of those people that is like, you shouldn't do a piece in VR, like, unless it's, I would say that like something like Key to Like, for example, very easily could have been just a traditional short film, but having it as a VR short film actually just completely changes your experience with it, and it allows you to engage with the characters and the story in a totally different way. So just like Shakespeare can be experienced as a play, as a film, as a song, as a poem, as all these kind of like as like a modern rap song, like just like the stories of Shakespeare can be told in lots of different ways. I think if you've got a good enough story, then you can tell it in VR. So I would never say to someone, no, don't bother trying XYZ, because for me, for example, I really love, especially kind of like female driven or like female character based dramas. Whether that be like more sci-fi dystopian, that's kind of my favorite kind of genre, but also just like character driven independent dramas, just like you would see like, at like the film festivals, I guess. Those things that really dig into like human emotion and like psychology and the dynamics in relationships, that kind of stuff. Like that is my crack. Like I love those pieces, but there's not really that many of those in VR. So hence why the kind of narrative in the original work that I do tends to look at that and tends to be based on that, and the scripts that I write tend to be in that genre. And currently those genres, like, I haven't really found any of the pieces, and I don't think my pieces are there so much so that it's like, yes, like this genre definitely works in VR. It's not quite there yet, but damn it, I'm going to keep experimenting with it, because I know that ultimately if it's a good story, people will enjoy it. So story, okay, I've banged on about that long enough. So then when it comes to like actual technical skills, like we're talking like the actual practical things that you can do, I guess it really depends on what kind of VR experience. So if it's an interactive game-based experience, then you should probably deep dive into Unity, and you should learn the basics of Unity, and you should have an understanding of how that works, how game dynamics works. Always put your audience first. That's the number one thing. You know, when you're designing any kind of experience, when you're designing any story, is like thinking about like, what do I want my audience to feel? Like, what do I want them to feel when they go into the headset? What do I want them to feel throughout? What do I want them to feel when they take the headset off? So if you're a game designer, that's going to look a bit different to if you're a 360 filmmaker, but it's the same thing, right? So, okay, Unity developer plus a kind of I guess it's kind of like a UX kind of brain as well, because you really want to consider the user experience. That's like so imperative. They go hand in hand. I think it's pointless having the technical skills of a Unity developer if you don't understand the user experience side of things. So a way that you can kind of upskill on that kind of thing is, again, like going and watching some of the pieces that have been tremendously successful. For VR storytelling, the game-based interactive content that I really love are things like The Line. That's an incredible example of brilliant VR storytelling done well, and the game and user kind of experience design has been, it's just so spot on. Absolutely, go check that one out. That won Venice last year, I think. Or like something like Gloomy Eyes, or, you know, there was a piece, trying to think, it's not interactive, but one of the early pieces that Oculus Studios put out, I believe, I think it was called Henry. It was about a hedgehog and it's its birthday, and it's very like Pixar-ish. But there's like some really nice bits in that, even though that was a 360, so you can't like interact with the scene. It was built in Unity, but the user experience of like, you know, directing attention and understanding kind of like that emotional journey for the audience and who you are as a character in that story was really on point. So maybe check that one out as well. On the 360 filmmaking side of things, I think the number one thing you should do, technically, is probably understand how to direct an audience's attention in 360. So I would get yourself a 360 camera, nice, cheap, like doesn't need to be high spec, and start to understand what happens when you know, move actors around, or even just subjects, or if you're in different places, like understand how your editing changes the audience's attention. Think of the camera as a person's head. That's what I always say. You know, in the early days of 360, people were really aggressively against this idea of like, oh no, like just treat the camera like a camera. And still to this day, there's like still like 360 pieces that there's not much thought given to the fact that, you know, you're jumping around in like a scene, you know, you're jumping different shots in the same room, and it just makes no sense. And from an audience point of view, it makes no sense. It's disorientating, and that is an example of something that probably should have been maybe like a flat piece, you know, because it's not adding anything by being in VR. Whereas if you think about it from the point of view as soon as someone puts on a headset, this camera becomes someone's head. So treat it that way, and push boundaries and explore like the dynamics of, you know, personal space and perspective with the camera, but always respect that that is someone's head. And if you want to make them uncomfortable, then do it intentionally and know why you're doing it. So there was like a couple of pieces in Tribeca this year, in the virtual cinema, that did that really well. Like there was this piece, and I'm forgetting the name of it, so I'm really sorry to the artist behind it, but they basically brought to life this famous painting where it's kind of like this giant, I'd never really heard of it because I'm not really a massive arts geek, but it was like this giant like eating this character. Anyway, you're the character, spoiler alert. And they played with perspective because the giant kind of got closer and closer, and then, you know, you're playing with the perspective of, you know, being this tiny little character in the hands of this giant. So that's a really good example of something where it's like, it's very intentional. You're intentionally meant to feel uncomfortable. You're intentionally playing with perspective. There's a reason for that. I've also seen other pieces though where that's not done as well. and there's no real reason why they're kind of throwing you around as a kind of voyeur of a scene, and that I'm a little bit less impressed with. But again, that's personal taste, could be completely wrong. In 5 years time we might look back and be like, oh yeah, that's commonplace in VR cinema now. So get yourself a 360 camera and just understand about directing audience attention. I think those are the two big. So the biggest things, just to ramble my way into a conclusion. Number one, story has to come first. It's so obvious, but it's so important. So story, number one. And number two, understanding the audience's experience. Those are the two technical skills where you can build skills on top of those. So you could build the skill of being able to, stitch 360 footage beautifully, or build a Unity environment. Like, you can have all those practical skills, but at the top of that pyramid needs to be good story and good user experience. Those are the two key things. I can't tell you how many things I've seen at film festivals where it's technically brilliant, well, sometimes they're not even that technically brilliant, but no shade to anyone, in particular. But in general, especially in the earlier days, but I say earlier days, like literally in the last few years, but, the technology is what it is, right? But some of them would be quite technically brilliant, but then they would just like fall down because A, you wouldn't know what you had to do because they weren't user intuitive at all. And B, there was no story. And sometimes like you would have like one or the other. So sometimes they were like nicely interactive, but it had made no real sense for the story, or like it was a good story, but it was really confusing because you didn't really know how to interact with it. You didn't know what you were expected to do. So have a think about that. I think if you're coming from a filmmaking background, you're probably more likely to be able to translate your experience into 360 first. And generally speaking, then you kind of like can progress on to be like to do more interactive or game-based stuff. If you're coming from a game background anyway, you've probably got a good understanding of some of those things anyway. So that's those are my general answers on what technical skills do you need to be a VR storytelling professional. And to be fair, I haven't really commented on the whole professional thing because I think that in itself is quite an interesting topic, which is, I don't know a single person, and this includes people that have this includes like the big names in this industry that have won things like Venice and Tribeca and, various other things. I don't know a single creator that is creating work of that caliber that isn't also supporting themselves financially by doing more corporate or work that has been funded by some kind of bid or arts organisation. I don't know a single person that is making a professional living solely from their VR storytelling pieces. Of course, you've got, for example, the studio behind The Line that won Venice, Arvory in Brazil. Fantastic people. Was very fortunate to get to visit them on the trip I took to Brazil last year. And they are a game studio, and they are phenomenal at like doing the VR storytelling. But that's not the bread and butter. That's not the thing making the money. The thing making the money is Pixel Ripped, I think, is their number one title, which is a VR game. So I wouldn't be lured into this idea that just because you're seeing stuff online and it looks like people are kind of, that's all they do, just be really careful with kind of like thinking that is a fact. Because even I found this even with like the general video world, like I would see people and I would assume that all they did was make documentaries because it looks like that's all they did. But in the background, they were doing branded content or like little ad gigs to like pay the way. I think that is the biggest secret and misconception of like the creative industries. I feel like unless you're working for a big production company or broadcaster or something where, it's a very, very small percentage of companies that all they do is original work. And even then, there are strings attached to that work. But I don't know many independent creators that are not supplementing their kind of VR storytelling with some kind of commercial work. So just keep that in mind, and that will change as I talked about this a little bit in episode number I want to say 8 or 9, when I talked about making money from your original work. That idea that it's a bit of a dangerous myth that we've been sold that you can, really easily create a sustainable income from your original work, especially in this industry, because the distribution channels are not there yet. So it's especially hard. But don't get disheartened, because I think the brilliant thing about that, and the brilliant thing about that model, and I've done this so many times, is if there's something that I want to do in my original work, but I'm not really sure how it would work, and I don't really want to spend money on like working out whether it will work, I'll try and kind of like pitch it as part of a client project. I'll be like, oh, why don't we have it so that you can interact with it in this way? And it's like, that's a client project. And what I'm doing is I'm using that as like a test, like an experiment for my own original project, because then I'll know how it works, if it works, and I'll know how much it will cost. And then I can feed that process back into the original work. So sometimes see commercial work as like a test bed to sharpen your technical skills, to kind of test things that you might not want to spend your own free time or money on testing for your original work. So that would be my advice. Anyway, this one was a rambly one, but I hope you got some value from that. If you've got a question or any follow-up or any comments in general, I love hearing from you. It's like my oxygen to kind of like hear from you and hear how you're kind of like enjoying the podcast and how it's helping. Some people have even like started to make money from the advice that I've been giving in the earlier episodes. So that is super exciting to me. Please reach out to me on social media, Alex Makes VR. You can email me, alexmakesvr@gmail.com. If you want to sign up for the daily reminders of when these episodes go live, sign up for the newsletter at alexmakesvr.com. And with that, I will leave you. Have a great day wherever you are in the world. I love you very much, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.